This happened several years ago when I was working in a downtown jail in a large city as a counselor. I worked a weird shift and got off at 2 a.m., so it was obviously dark when I got off work, and most of the people on the roads were people who'd just closed down the bars downtown. At this job, I interacted with inmates who were various levels of stable and sober, and sometimes they were released at the same time as I was leaving work. The garage where I parked was a couple of blocks away from the jail, so I was cautious walking to my car but didn't usually have issues. Anyway, this particular night, I got to my car safely and started home, about a 25-minute drive. Very quickly after I pulled out of the garage, I noticed a car right behind me with its high beams on. It followed me through downtown, onto the highway, and then exited at my exit. I wasn't too freaked out yet because I lived off a major road, but then it took every turn I did and pulled into my apartment complex right behind me. Well, at this point I'm getting concerned, but it's a big complex, so I just head toward my building. The car is right behind me. I usually back into my reserved parking spot, but this car is so close that I literally can't. I pull in forward. The car drives up behind me and stops, blocking me in. At this point, I'm scared. I consider calling someone, but all my friends are probably asleep because it's 3 a.m. Calling 911 feels like an overreaction. So finally I dial 911 on my phone but don't press the call button and step out of my car. A man gets out of the other car. He's tall, white, wearing a vest and a fedora. He stares at me, female, 26, blonde, 5 feet 3 inches, for like 10 seconds, says, "Oh," gets back in his car, and drives off. Still one of the weirdest encounters of my life. A few months ago, I moved into a new apartment. It was small, cheap, and perfect for my budget. The only weird thing. The apartment next to mine, 3B, always had this faint smell of something rotting. I figured it was just old food or maybe garbage that hadn't been taken out, so I ignored it. One night, around 2 a.m., I heard a faint tapping on my wall. I thought it was just the pipes, but then it started to sound like a soft, deliberate knocking. It was slow, rhythmic, and it didn't stop. I knocked back, annoyed, and the tapping immediately stopped. The next morning, I ran into my landlord in the hallway and casually asked about the neighbor in 3B. He looked at me with confusion and said, "Nobody's lived in 3B for months. The last tenant disappeared without a trace, and no one's moved in since." That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., the tapping started again, but this time, it was louder and more urgent, like someone was pounding from inside the wall. I pressed my ear against the wall, heart racing, and I swear I heard someone whisper, "Help me." Terrified, I called the cops. When they broke into 3B, it was completely empty, except for one thing, a small, crumpled note pinned to the wall with my name on it, "You're next." As I stood there, frozen in fear, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Why did you call them? Now they're angry. They're coming for you." When I was 11 years old in the early 1980s, I had an experience so remarkable that I remember it very often still to this day. I'm in my early 50s now. It was a Friday evening, and we had visitors and I wanted to impress them with my pet mouse. The mouse just happened to be a small, brown variety. Sometime during the night, the mouse slipped out of my hands and escaped under the cabinets in the kitchen. I looked for a long time that evening, but never caught the mouse. At some time in the evening, I fell asleep on the couch in the living room. It was very common for our family to stay up late watching TV on Friday evenings, and it was very common for my mother to leave me asleep, undisturbed on the couch. At approximate 3 or 4 in the morning I woke up, and as I raised off the couch, I could see a small white mouse running around the kitchen floor. The living room and kitchen were joined. I was very excited, believing I was finally going to catch the mouse. Oddly though, I knew it wasn't my mouse, because of the color, yet I was compelled to follow this mouse around, trying to catch it, all the while kind of believing it was my mouse. I would get close and almost catch the mouse, but it was always a step out of reach. After several minutes of this, I realized I was now back in the living room near the front door. As the mouse got closer to the front door, I saw it swing wide open, by itself, and even thought I knew the mouse was incapable to opening this door. I knew it had. At this point I was determined, and so I followed the mouse out the front door, across the front of our house, and then down the side of our house. About midway to the back of the yard I became ferried, and that's when I realized I was being trapped, that something terrifying waited for me in the backyard and the mouse was a trick. I turned around and ran back to the front door, which was still opened. When I entered the door, I realized that whatever was waiting for me in the backyard was already in the house. I don't recall seeing it, I just knew it was there. My next memory is feeling myself floating in the air with light swirling all around me. Then it was morning, and I was waking from the couch, believing I had dreamed the whole thing. 30 years later my mother and were talking and the subject of the old house came up, and that's when she told me she saw me floating in the air one morning with bright light swirling around me. That she could see me from her bedroom down the hall and that she was terrified and couldn't move. After some time, she gained courage and came to check on me. I was sound asleep, back on the couch. She kind of thought she dreamed it too, but stated she never forgot it. That's when I shared my experience. What happened to me? Hello, let me introduce myself. I am a 15-year-old girl, and I had a terrifying encounter one evening around 10 p.m. I was watching a documentary series on my TV, nothing unusual so far. You should know that my TV is in the living room, and right in front of me, there is a window next to my armchair that has no curtain and is very low. As I continued watching TV, I started to feel a little hungry. I got up and went to the fridge to grab something to eat. When I turned around to go back to my armchair, I found myself standing directly in front of the window. That's when I saw him. There, outside the window, was a boy. He was wearing white clothes and a hat, his brown hair visible under the brim. He was looking straight at me, holding his phone horizontally. It took me a moment to realize that he was filming me. I jumped back in shock, my heart pounding. I felt paralyzed by fear, unable to move. The boy slowly lowered his phone, his eyes never leaving mine. Then, he smiled, a chilling, terrifying smile that made him look like a psychopath. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, probably around 2 minutes, before he suddenly turned and ran off. I was left shaking and in tears. I told my parents what happened, but they couldn't find the person. You should know that I live in a fairly dangerous area, and I'm new here, so I had no idea something like this could happen. After that night, I became paranoid. I was too scared to go outside. Then, on a school day about 2 weeks later, I had to leave the house to catch my bus, like I do every morning. I leave extremely early, so it was still dark outside. I went to my usual bus stop, but there was something strange about that morning. The streets were empty, no cars, no people. I felt like I was being watched. And then, I saw him. The same boy who had filmed me. He was standing on one of the tracks near the train station by my bus stop, staring at me. I felt a wave of fear wash over me. Without a second thought, I turned and ran home as fast as I could, not daring to look back. I was crying by the time I reached my house. I didn't go to school that day. I stayed home, too afraid to leave. I haven't seen the boy since, and I hope I never do.